Hello, Assalamu alaikum. So, welcome back to today's and this week's another lecture, which is image segmentation. So, we have to cover this topic this week. Now, image segmentation is one of the important research problems in the field of image processing as well as computer vision. And as we'll progress through this lecture, I will let you know that how it's mainly have transformed its roots from digital image processing to computer vision problem. But today we will be focusing the image segmentation with respect to the image processing techniques, and in the next series of this lecture I will try to make a relationship and progress the show you the progression of how it has transformed itself from a basic image processing problem to computer vision problem. So let's talk about some image segmentation techniques in this lecture. So why we do image segmentation and what challenges are related to image segmentation? Let's visualize them. So you can see that this is the picture of kittens and they are actually distinguishable by color, sort of, but not the texture. So the texture of all of them is the same, but two of the cats have the same color and three of the cats are of different colors. But on the other hand, you can see that there is a chameleon which is distinguishable by the texture but not its color. So the color is the same but the texture is different. So in both these images you will see that one is distinguishable by color and the second is distinguishable by the patterns. So we have to take into account that how can we apply the segmentation with respect to the colors and the patterns. Now in this case, the third case, the wheels are part of the car but not similar in color or texture. So they should be grouped together with the car. They are not like they are not a different entity to this particular car. But on the other hand, if we see this, now how can we recognize that the head and the body sorter are the same person when the color and the patterns are different? So those are some of the challenges with respect to the segmentation. Now another challenge is a kind of illusion, that how can you segment out this dog with respect to the background, because both of them are homogeneous. So how you can actually carry out the segmentation process, or how the method can differentiate between the object or the foreground and the background. So these are some of the challenges with respect to image segmentation. Now some of the issues for segmentation is that what process you are going to employ, either it's a bottom up approach or a top down process, which what kind of segmentation you want to perform, like it's supervised or unsupervised, what is the application for which you are going to segment the image. So we have to answer these particular questions, and I will try to make it clear when we progress through this lecture. So the first technique, which is one of the basic ones, is region growing, and it tells us that if you threshold an entire image, what you may get is a bunch of disconnected regions that are above the threshold. So it means that it's a kind of a blob you are producing, that these kind of segments which you see, let's say you like assign the region 1 to it, region 1 to this, region 1 to this, region 2 is this, region 2 is this, and region 1 is this. So these blobs or the regions are connected to each other with respect to the regions they are assigned, the region numbers they are assigned. So if we want a common pixel near one point, we shall draw one point here, and the region should grow around that point which represents this particular block. Now as we are going to talk about in this lecture, that you can clean some of this stuff up with morphological image processing. Like in this case, if you have a kind of irregular blobs, or if the regions are not matching up with the one. It's like they are not matching up to your expectations, and you need to clean up some stuff. So you can clean up using morphological image processing, though the morphological image processing is not the scope of this lecture, but it can be used to refine your segmentation process, where you can select a region which you mostly care about, but you certainly get something which gonna look like this, like something like this, a blob, and the rest of the region will be black color, like background, all zeros. So it's like I click on a point and the region grows around the pixels with respect to the similar intensity levels. These are some of the examples of region growing segmentation, but this is a well refined segmentation, not the simple algorithm which we are going to discuss. So the basic algorithm here is that we have a kind of an input image, let's say I of xy, we represent it with I of xy, and we get a binary seed. Now in previous example, this point is particularly a seed. So we get a binary seed image, and we represent it as s of xy for locations of interest. For example, we can do it by thresholding. So what we want to do is we want to reduce the seed connected components down to a single point each. So let's say my new image, let me call the process image as t of xy, and I say that if it is equal to 1 if I of xy satisfies some predicate or condition, and it will be 0 elsewhere where the condition is not satisfied at all. So for example, if f of xy is 8 connected to seed point. Now 8 connected, what I mean is the 8 neighborhood. It's like if this is the point, so in xy direction, this is a kind of a 8 connected. So 8 connected to seed point x and y, and I want to calculate that if the intensity at point x and y, like the difference between the intensities of point x and y and at the point xi yi, which is the 8 connected neighborhood, is less than or equal to the threshold value. So if it is less than or equal to threshold value, it is connected, otherwise it is not connected. So there are MATLAB tools which perform this automatically. One of them is a command named region props, which is a kind of reflex to morphological image processing, which you can use to get the centroid of the point. Or you could do something like erosion, where we start with a big white blob and we shrink it down to a nugget center. So what I want to say is that any region I care about, I just shrink it down to one location. Now let me show you an example of this. So MATLAB, okay. So this is an example of a region growing, and this particular implementation has been done by D. Kroon. So you can find this implementation on the internet. So what I will do is I will just read the image. So let me read the image, which is I am read, and hypofix. Let me just move everything else. Now here you can see that the image is quite big, so let me just try to resize it. Double, and then just resize it by. Okay. So now you can see that the image has been scaled down. I have resized it to half of its dimensions. Now let me just run this code, which is region growing, and hi. Now this is my hypoface image, and what I want to do is I want to define a region. So let's say first let me define this region. Now once I define this region, once I click it on this region, let me show you the result of. Now you can see that it has colored this particular image. Let me zoom it for you. So see, it has recolored this. So this is a kind of a, I just click one point and it grows a region with respect to the similar intensity levels. Now um, let me run this again to show you. Okay, so let me point out my point at this. So once I point out at this, let me show you the result again. Now you can see that the region has been grown here, which is at this location. So it has grown the region with respect to the point I selected. Okay, let me show you one more example with respect to this, so it will be more clear. And let us now try with a point which is, let me now try with a point which is more prominent. Let's say this one. So once I select this, so now you can see, so the similar regions are selected and the region has been grown this. So this is particularly the segmentation with respect to the region grown. I hope you got the point that how the region growing works. So let's move back to our lecture here. Now another technique which is kind of you will be familiar with if you have studied computer graphics. You may have heard about things like quad tree and hierarchical decomposition of images. So this idea is very basic and it's region split and merging. So this should be this and this should be this. So let me do this way. So idea is sort of same. I want to find in the image which meets a certain condition. So what we do is we specify condition rules. We divide the image into a quadrant like this. We divide the image into a quadrant. We label the quadrant 1 if you satisfy the rule, otherwise label it 0. So let's say that these two quadrants satisfy the condition and these two doesn't. So what we do is we split the ones labeled 0 and then we do like this. So these were already 1, we split these into another quad and then we labeled which satisfy the condition and the ones which does not satisfy the condition, and similarly with the second quadrant. And what we have to do is we have to repeat, we have to divide it into different quadrants like this and then again label the ones which satisfy the condition and we do not label the ones which does not satisfy the condition, or we label them 0 and then again divide the quadrant into another quadrant. So you can see what I am getting is kind of a like mosaic of bigger and smaller squares that do or don't satisfy the rules. So if I think of it as a binary image, maybe the white pixels would be the ones that satisfy the condition, whereas the black pixels don't satisfy the rules. So you can imagine you kind of get a blocky version of a threshold image where you can imagine storing this and implementing this very efficiently using a quad tree type algorithm where you kind of recursively keep on splitting the image and so on. So this is kind of similar to block proc command in MATLAB in a way, except that it is a kind of more of a hierarchical thing, and block proc is more of a thing where I specify the smallest block size and then everything kind of has the same block size, right? So let's take the example of region splitting and merging. So this is the code for region splitting and merging. If you want, I can just give you, I will try to upload the code. So here, let me just clear out all my previous variables and all that. Now let me again kind of read the image, and I use the chord tree decomposition, which is this command in MATLAB. So I just decompose it and I just divide it into blocks, and then I apply this region splitting and merging thing, which is like chord tree set block. So this is the command which does this process. So let me show you the result. So here you can see the result of this hippo and this particular region split and merge segmentation technique. You can see that it's a kind of a like, you can understand, but there are many pixels that satisfy the condition. There are many pixels that first do not satisfy the condition, and they are kind of splitted and then merged. So it gives you an idea of the shape, but still it's quite vague. It doesn't represent it in a kind of eye-pleasing representation. Now let's just do it with another example, another image. Now see, this is a more cleaner version. You can represent it. So this is the plane, and you can see that this is the segmentation which we are getting here. So it's a kind of a dot printer thing, or the earlier stages where image processing was taking a boom, and these algorithms were proposed to perform some image segmentation techniques. Now there is another technique which is clustering, and clustering is a kind of the basic idea for this is to do k-means clustering. Now I'm not sure if you are familiar with k-means clustering or not, but it's a kind of a unsupervised learning technique. So if you have like learned it in probability and statistics, or in your if you have learned artificial intelligence or pattern recognition, you must have come up or you must have visited this kind of technique which is clustering. But if you didn't visited it, if you have not learned it, it's okay. I will explain it to you in a simple analogy that how that works. So basically, let's the basic idea is to do k-means clustering, that is to gather n-dimensional data into natural clusters. So first I need the idea of k-means clustering. This is a form of a statistics, so it's very easy idea. Now look at the picture above. The premise is, okay, as a human, I kind of see that there are these visual groupings here. So this is a different group, this is a different group, and this is a different group. So there is a visual grouping of points in this two-dimensional space. What I want is an algorithm that all of this stuff is, that show that all of this stuff is one chunk, all of this stuff is second chunk, and all of this stuff is the third chunk. So in this case, user chooses the number of clusters, that is how many clusters you have to divide this particular two-dimensional space. So I am going to talk about the working of this algorithm in a very general way. You do not know where these clusters are going to be. You kind of make a guess where the cluster centers might be in this space. So the clusters in the same space are as my data points. So you can alternatively put a threshold as to how far a mean could go in terms of changing. So this is a particular algorithm which specifies the k-means algorithm. So first we have to specify an initial set of cluster centers, let's say from M1 to MK, and for each intensity values in dataset or each data point in the dataset, we assign it to the closest cluster. So this is the mathematical notation of it, that the data point belongs to the cluster J if the distance between the data point and the mean of that cluster is less than or equal to the distance between the data point and the cluster K. So these are two clusters, mean of cluster J and mean of cluster K, where K is not equal to J. So what we are going to do is we compute the cluster centroid, the distance from the cluster centroids, and assign each of the data point to that particular cluster center. Then we update the means, like we update the means with respect to the average value of that cluster, like the cluster centroid, and this is one way to compute the average. And what we will do is we will repeat the steps 2 and 3 like constantly unless and until we see a convergence. A convergence means that the cluster mean stops changing. So we would see that okay, now the mean is not changing, so it means that it has converged. Now one way to do the clustering is to take the image histogram in terms of image processing, if we are going to adapt into image processing. So what we can do is we can compute the image histogram. We have already learned about image histograms. So what we can do is we can like define the clusters with respect to their intensity levels, the grouping of intensity levels into a particular histogram, and then we segment out the clusters based on the histograms which have been provided here. So to summarize k-means, what we do is we initialize k-means with k random locations, we converge and do this n times and take the best result. Now let me show you one of the example of general k-means, that how that works. So let me just show you the dataset first. So this is kind of dataset representation. So we have this representation of the dataset. The data points are spread or scattered in this way. Now what we do is we apply the k-means here. So this is the built-in command in MATLAB for k-means. So we apply the k-means and we define 3 clusters here. Okay. So once we define 3 clusters, we plot the cluster regions onto this particular data points. So once we run it, this is the result which we get. So this is how the k-means cluster works. So this is a kind of a clustering result which we obtain from k-means clustering in MATLAB, which is the predefined command. So the first question which arises is that how can we use this concept of k-means clustering into the image processing domain? So we call this modification of k-means clustering in image processing as superpixel segmentation. So the modification is referred to as superpixel, and the regions of the image that are contiguous and have similar intensity colors are actually clustered out, and we represent them into a single cluster. So the next question will be why we want to do this. So there are 2 reasons to do this. One is the more compact representations can be obtained, and I'll explain you with respect to an example which we will see. So for instance, thousands of superpixels could represent millions of pixels, and we'll discuss this method at how we can do that. And we want to keep things together for subsequent segmentation and for computational efficiency. So this is a paper which was proposed in International Conference of Computer Vision 2003, which is a flagship conference for computer vision studies. And this is the paper. If you want to just want to learn more about this superpixel segmentation, you can refer to this paper, and it gives you a more detailed version of what I am trying to explain here. Now, one of the algorithm which employs this superpixel segmentation is the SLIC algorithm, which is the simple linear iterative clustering. Now, idea is to cluster 5-dimensional vectors, not 3-dimensional. So previously we discussed about that how we can use color intensity levels and we can just segment out the pixels from RGB intensity levels. But here we do not just consider the RGB intensity levels, which is the 3 color dimensions, but we also consider the spatial domain, which is X and Y, which refers to the location. So what we want to do or how we want to apply this algorithm is, let's say that we have this grid type representation here. So what we want to do is we want to initialize superpixel centers by sampling n locations on a regular grid in the image plane like this, and move slightly the window within, let's say, 3 by 3 neighborhood to lie on lowest gradient position. So it's like this is another way of saying that the seeds are kind of in the flattest location as possible. We don't want to start on an edge. So for each cluster Mi, let's name this, or let's notate this cluster center as mean Mi. We want to compute the distance between Mi and each pixel in a neighborhood of Mi. And we want to assign pixels to cluster I if its distance is better than its current value. And we have to update the cluster centers like we do in k-means. So you know how that the k-means is used in accordance with respect to the image processing techniques. So one of the things which we want to discuss here is that, of course, we have to repeat it until the convergence as we do in k-means. But other than that, we can replace the color of pixels in each cluster with the average color. So this is an optional thing which we can do, and we can make it like a more refined version of the segmentation. Another thing is that we have to tell the algorithm that you cannot go beyond this distance, or you cannot go beyond the value of a spatial domain, like because we are dealing with the spatial domain, so the spatial distance should not be greater than a specific threshold. So we do not want to increase the regions. We have to be a kind of a constant with the regions which they are specified with respect to the distance of the spatial points. So here, what is the distance? The distance is a kind of a combination. So if you can see the color distance value is in the form of RGB I and RGB J, where I and J are two centers like clusters, and spatial distance is in the form of the spatial points like X and Y, the location points. And 2 refers to the Euclidean distance. So it's like you can employ other distances as well, like Manhattan distance, and there are Jacquard distance and many other distances which are available. So it's just an example that you can employ Euclidean distance for this. Now, of course, the issue will be that these two distances are not on the same scale. So the idea is to normalize the scale, because the values of the color distances is from if they are in RGB, it's from 0 to 255. If it's in grayscale, or if it's in like black and white, it will be in the range of 0 to 1. And the spatial distance is kind of, it depends on the resolution of the image. So there is a huge difference between the scale, and we have to normalize the scale. And how we can do that? We can apply this formula. It's like we normalize it with respect to the color range, or with respect to the range of the values which we are using. So use color range to tune trade-off between color distance and the spatial distance. If color range is really big, the relationship will be like superpixels will be more compact, and if color range is small, superpixels will be more tightly stuck to image boundaries. So let's see one of the examples of the SLIC algorithm in MATLAB. So let's say we just clear out all our variables. And let's come back to our friendly hippo. So this is our friendly hippo here, and we want to just kind of like transform it into the LAB color space, which is here. So we transform it into LAB color space here, and then we separate the images using clusters. So here is separating the image using clusters. So let's see the example here. So this is the image labeled by cluster index, and as you can see that uh, the images have been divided into different clusters. Let's say 3 clusters, which we have already explained that we are dividing it into 3 clusters. Now what we can do is we can separate each cluster in a different image. So let's say we want to separate the image with cluster 1. So here we are separating the image with cluster 1. So here you can see that hippo is kind of missing its big mouth and teeth. So this is the intensity levels which are grouped together with respect to the k-means clustering. And then we separate out the cluster 2, which is this. So here we only see its teeth and tongue. And we separate out the cluster 3rd, in which we mostly see the a different intensity. It's like if you notice the original picture, let me show here. So these are the intensity levels which are quite different than these intensity levels and these intensity levels. So these are merged or like clustered together because they have a different intensity. They are like more brighter version in terms of the intensity levels which are shown here, and this is again the same intensity levels, or we can say a homogeneous region, and these intensity levels are a bit darker, so they are clustered together. So if we can just try to segment it with more clusters, then maybe we get some more regions here based on the intensity, based on the different intensity levels with respect to the teeth and the tongue. So let's see the demo of the slick. So again, I would just clear out all my variables here. Now here, let's see this example. So I have my image here, and I have applied this pixel, super pixel. So it's like 500 super pixels here, which are actually representing 960 by 768. So it's like 737,280 pixels, and those 737,280 pixels are represented by only 500 pixels. So once we divide it into this select representation, we can just use, or we can transform it into an Instagram filter like this, which is kind of more artistic version of this segmentation. Now remember that uh, we can change this particular superpixel segmentation representation by doing, like, let's say I just change the number of superpixel segmentation to 5000. Now what I'm doing is I'm representing that 737,280 pixels into this 5000 pixels. So let's run this again. So now you can see the representation is something like this. So it's like more of very small regions are actually spotted, and the superpixel segmentations are spreaded out in terms of the intensity levels which can be grouped together. but still, like, it's a representation with very less regions. And if you just perform the smoothing for creating Instagram like filter, you will see that it's trying to be more of like the original image. So it's moving towards the original image. Why? Because we have already we have used more pixels to represent it rather than less pixels. But if you just represent it with very less pixels, which you can do, of course, so what we can do is we will now move forward for representing 5000 to only 50 pixels. Now if you just represent it with only 50 pixels, you will see that the larger regions are grouped together here, and the smoothing is a kind of just labeling the clusters with different color schemes. And of course you can do it with lesser number of clusters, like if you want to still perform less number of clusters, like let's say 5, you can still do it, and the result will be something like this. So these are the 5 clusters which have been segmented, and this is the clustering result. So this is the color scheme which have been assigned to each cluster. Okay. Yes. Variables. Let's clear the variables here. So I hope you have understood what is the SLIC algorithm, which is simple linear iterative clustering. Now another one which is very important in terms of image processing literature is graph cut segmentation, and the idea is to separate foreground and background. So it's like the why we actually use this graph cut segmentation is that sometimes the thresholding fails when the foreground and background are complex. For instance, zebra standing in a grassy area. So for such complex scenes, segmentation can be challenging, and the thresholding would fail in that case because the zebra itself is black and white color, and then the grass is another color, so it's very difficult to divide it into foreground and background dynamically. So the figure represents here an image plane, and each of the dots are the pixels. I have a foreground terminal and the background terminal. So initially all the pixels are connected to the foreground and the background. It's tough to draw on the paper, so let me just show you a nicer picture. So you can see that F represents foreground and B represents background, and all the pixels are actually connected to both the terminals. So the idea is to cut some of these edges. So a cut is a set of edges that when removed separates F and B terminals. So I want to cut in such a way that one chunk of the edges belong to the foreground and the other chunk belongs to the background. And that kind of implies the segmentation like this. And we want to find the best cut. So what we can do is we can assign a weight to each edge, both pixel to pixel and pixel to terminal. So in this case, if you will see that there is a pixel to pixel kind of joining, like there is a relationship to the pixel to pixel, and there is a relationship from pixel to the terminal. So these are the relationship to the pixel of like this is the relationship to pixel to terminal, and this is the relationship to the pixel to pixel. So we want to assign weight to each edge, and both pixel to pixel and pixel to terminal, and we want to find the minimum cut, that is the C that minimizes this particular weight. So to in other words, I can say that we want to minimize the sum over all the edges in C of the weights that I have sliced away. So how does this graph cut segmentation works? We want to cut between the adjacent pixels that we would use, and the weight can be represented at this, which dist represents the distance. Now here the most important part is this eta, which represents the variance between the pixels. If you can see it's a kind of a Gaussian shaped pixel. So what does this mean is that if ij is similar to ii, then the distance goes to 0 and e terms goes to 1, like this. But if they are not equal, then the power to e term gets bigger and each term gets 0. So this is not actually equal. So I and ij will be dissimilar. It is actually low cost to cut dissimilar edges. So if we have the low cost, we just cut dissimilar edges, and if we have a high cost, we keep them together. So the main idea or the advanced idea which makes this graph cut segmentation kind of different with respect to the other segmentations which we have discussed so far is that it lets the user to scribble on the image to denote some initial foreground and background pixels which form probability distributions. Now probability distributions, it's like the probability distribution for foreground with respect to the color and the probability distribution for the background with respect to the color. So scribble does two things. First of all, if I scribble something on the image, I am nailing down to say, the scribble points have to be belonging with either the foreground or the background. So in the steps, it can be seen that the scribble pixels are forced to stick with one terminal, either foreground or background, and these are the weights which are assigned. So if the weight of the intensity level to the background is 0, it means that there is no cost to cutting that, and I will just segment the background. But if the weight is something like infinity, it means that I need a massive cost to cut these edges. So what I will do is I'll keep them as it is. I'll just group them together. So let's think about it. This particular second point, which is that the other pixels, the weight from I to F is minus lambda log of probability of background II. So this is a kind of a backwards, but let me explain this, that why it is like this. So let's think about it. Let's say the probability of the background pixel here, the probability of the background pixel is very low, so the value in the log becomes close to negative infinity, which means that the weight on that is going to be very, very large. So it means that I will assign the pixels to the foreground rather than the background. But it happens vice versa, like the probability is very high, so of course it will not be negative infinity, it will be towards the positive infinity, and if you multiply it with the minus sign, again it will be negative infinity. So the cost will be very, very low, and I will not assign it to the foreground, I will just assign it to the background. So in the PowerPoint, actually they use the graph cut. I am not sure if you are familiar with it. So let's say again we are back with a friendly hippo. So let's say we use this image. So you go to format and you have here remove background. So what you can do is, first let me start with some initialization. So I do not want to mark any image. So let's say, so it has automatically just used the segmentation and assigned a foreground and a background automatically, and it has segmented the hippo. But let's say I want to just mark the areas which we want to keep. So let's say I want to mark the area, this area and this area. So I want to mark this area. Now these areas have been kept and the other areas have been segmented out. Now again I can just mark areas to remove. So let's say I just remove these teeth. I do not want it. So if I just keep the changes, you will see that okay, my hippo is missing the teeth and everything is segmented up. So this is how the graph cut segmentation works in PowerPoint. Now let us see the graph cut segmentation in MATLAB. So in MATLAB, the graph cut segmentation is can be opened through image segmenter app. Image segmenter app is the default image segmentation of the graph cut. Now if you open it, this window will open, and let's just load the image. Let's just load my image first, and then you can select this graph cut. So once you select this graph cut, it shows you to mark the foreground, so you can just draw a scribble to mark the foreground here. So I have marked the foreground, and then let me mark the background in a very casual way. So here you can see that it has segmented it, so but still my foreground is not so accurate. So let me just add some more markings. So now you can see that my foreground has been added. So if I want to create the mask, so this is the mask, this is my foreground, and everything else is in the background, and I can just export it, or I can just export the image. But you can let me show you another example of this. So let me just delete it, and let me just use the hippo. So here is a friendly hippo, and I'll just use the graph cut. So I'll mark the foreground regions. So this is my foreground regions, which is, and my background will be this water. So you can see that how it has kind of used this foreground pixels and background pixels. Okay. So now one more thing which I want to show you is that these graph cut algorithms are actually based on superpixel segmentation. So if you just click here to show subregions, so you will see that the graph cut actually considers these superpixels rather than the pixels itself. So these graph cuts actually use these they are actually stacked up onto the superpixel segmentation. So they use the superpixel segmentation for dividing it in the regions, and then they use the scribbles to divide it into foreground and background. So if you just create the mask, you will get this kind of segmentation design. So I hope you have already learned about the basic segmentation techniques which we have discussed so far, and you can use the lazy snapping function in MATLAB, which is a kind of a default implementation for the graph cut or the graph cut basically. So you can use it and let me know in the class that if there is any problem you are facing it in the MATLAB. Let me just write the MATLAB properly. Okay, so let's meet in the next video lecture. Till then, goodbye.